Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Stasek. I'm the past president of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, and I'd like to welcome you to another one of our First Thursday events. Tonight's event is called Free Speech. I'm right, and you're wrong. And basically, we're going to be talking about something that I think everybody is talking about right now, and that is the difficulty we have as a nation communicating with each other. Now, I'm sure that all of you that are watching understand that when you try to have a conversation with your mother-in-law, father-in-law, your friends, your neighbors, depending on your perspective, you may be actually having a really hard time communicating in a civil discourse. Now, we know that the last 4 years have made this especially difficult. Frankly, people have become so polarized, and there's a grave danger in that for our nation, for our society, frankly, for our world. And so we're going to talk about that. We have four wonderful speakers tonight on our panel. Our first is Scott Tilley. He founded the Center for Technology and Society in 2016. He's a professor emeritus at the Florida Institute of Technology, president of the Big Data Florida Users Group, senior fellow at the American Security Council Foundation, Space Coast Writers Guild fellow and author. He's got a PhD in computer science from the University of Victoria. We've also got Barb Segura. Barb is a licensed clinical mental health counselor and certified addiction counselor. She worked in the prison system for 20 years and has worked with military members and their families in the early years of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Barb imagines an America where there is enough food, livable wages, affordable housing, and healthcare for all. Britt Kennerly, who actually may be a little bit late tonight. Britt is Florida Today's opinion page community issues columnist. She's a veteran journalist with much experience covering a very wide range of issues. If you read the Florida Today, you know Britt Kennerly. She grew up in Kentucky, attended UK and the University of Cincinnati, and is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst campus. She's been with Florida Today for 11 years. And Patty Farley is currently in her second term as president of the Democratic Women's Club of Florida. She's a professional educator certified to teach in all areas of social studies, science, gifted studies, and focuses on U.S. government history. Patty actually is involved in so many things. I could probably go on all night about that, but for our local community, a number of different Democratic organizations, and she's a great community leader. Last time I talked to her, she was stuck on traffic out on I-95, hoping to join us very shortly. But we've got to be patient with a couple of our speakers. But we do have a great panel of four people who are going to be looking into this issue.
Sorry to interrupt you, but Britt Kennerly is that.
Britt, welcome. It's great to see you. And if you can unmute yourself, you'll be able to do that. Our format tonight is going to be, we have a few small business items that have to be taken care of. Then a panel of four will each speak in turn. And then comes the chance for our audience to join us. If you're here joining us via Zoom, after our panel is done, we'll open the floor for questions and answers, and all of you can ask whatever you'd like. We just ask that you please keep your questions short. We ask that you make sure that it is a question rather than a statement, and it's an opportunity to be part of the discussion. If you're with us on Facebook Live, you might be able to send us a message. I'm not certain how well that's going to work tonight, but I think our Facebook Live folks are going to be watching for the most part this evening. But we welcome all of you. It is a great evening to have all of you with us on this very, very important topic. I would like to introduce our Space Coast Progressive Alliance President, Raed Al-Shaibi. Raed, welcome.
Well, thank you, Phil. I appreciate your great introduction here. We have a great, wonderful speakers, and I'm excited and can't wait to listen to them. And I just want to welcome also our audience, our membership to our first Thursday of the month program that we do. And I just can't wait to see. This is a very controversial issue. It's a social pandemic, as I call it. that we're suffering from. Everybody has their own opinion, and we don't know who's right and who's wrong. So I think it'll be great to listen to our experts tonight and see what they can lead us to. But I just want to also thank our APC, the Action Project Committee that produces these programs on every month. And we have, I want to thank the leaders of this program, the producers, Larry, Abdul, Karen Houston, and Ellen. They did a wonderful job, and we ought to encourage everyone to stick around to the end, because we also need your input on these kind of programs. So if you have the time at the end, we're going to need about 5 to 10 minutes to just critique this program and get better. That's how we all going to learn to make these programs the best that there is in Brevard County. Want to remind everyone, we would love to have more membership join. Membership is for the whole year, it's $25. And I want to recognize one student that joined us last month. And I was very excited to see the name was Nadia. She's from Palm Bay. And I want to highlight her name and encourage other students to join us. We get really excited when we see students joining in. It's only $10 for students. And also I want to put a plug for next month's event. We have also a great program in June. And another great program that we're working the details of, but the name is going to be Conspiracy of Lies, Voter Suppression in the US. So hope you can join us on the first Thursday of June. And I think the more we also have volunteers that can join us and give us opinions, give us ideas, and they can also join our Action Project Committee. So if you have the time, we'd love to have you join our organization. This is a wonderful organization that has been on for many years and would love to continue produce these kind of events. So I don't want to take more from the speaker's time. Thank you, Phil. I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Ryan. It's wonderful to see so many new faces here tonight and to have all of our friends with us. Again, it's great to have you. For those that just joined us, our event tonight is called Free Speech. I'm right and you're wrong. And we're going to be talking not really just about free speech, but about communication in our society, civil discourse at a time of great polarization, and how important it is that we can share our ideas. We may not agree with each other, but we should respect each other. And sometimes that's really hard. The truth is, this is something that probably would take an entire semester or a year as a college course. And tonight we just have a few minutes to cover it. But boy, do we have 4 wonderful speakers. This evening, first speaking will be Dr. Scott Tilley, and followed by Britt Kennerly. We're hoping that Patty Farley will be able to join us. She's stuck in traffic last time I heard. And then we'll close the program with Barb Segura. Our first speaker, Dr. Scott Tilley. Scott, you've got the floor.
All right. Well, can everyone hear me? Thumbs up?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you again for inviting me to participate in this incredibly important topic. I wanted to give everyone a little bit of sort of background of the free speech topic from my perspective. Because for the last year, as part of our Big Data Florida group, we had a 7-part series on fake news. And I just wanted to very quickly just go over what the 7 topics were. The very first one, which we started with, was January of last year, pre-pandemic. It was called propaganda, because fake news is actually not new. We just have social media to spread it at a way that the previous propaganda techniques of dropping leaflets or whatever it might have been to spread fake news were in play. In February, we had a second part, and it was called dissemination. And that was really focused on how people are using social media to disseminate fake news. And we're going to circle back here about free speech, but imagine that whatever you might believe is being disseminated across the social media platforms. Our part 3 was sort of the flip side, which is many companies that are working on detection, how to detect fake news and limit the spread of what is arguably demonstrably incorrect information, but people who are not aware of it are just consuming it like crazy. And we actually had a little demonstration of different algorithms in computer science of how we're doing that. In June, we had part 4, and maybe Britt can appreciate this. It was all about journalism and how journalism is being hammered by fake news and social media platforms and advertising revenue, and everything else is just affecting them terribly. In September, we usually take the summer off. We were specifically focused on fake news related to COVID-19. And you mentioned the difficulties in communication. Right now, the communication related to COVID-19 is just all over the map. Should you take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine or should you wait? Should you take the AstraZeneca thing or should you wait? What age should you be? Well, it depends actually on what week the CDC is releasing their guidance. So it's really confusing for the average person. In November, directly related, I believe, to the topic your president mentioned coming up in June about voter suppression, we spoke about elections and fake news and elections and how, you know, the Russian hackers and all this other stuff was affecting people's opinions about the elections. And we wrapped up with a session on augmented and virtual reality, the ultimate fake news environment where you can literally not tell what is real and what is fake. And if you can imagine people being totally immersed in this environment rather than just listening to the radio, what's real and so on is going to become like almost impossible to detect. So we did have this long series that all about fake news. And the reason why it touches on free speech is because many people who have, you know, we'll just call them different opinions, are using these technologies. I'm a tech guy. They're using these technologies to spread disinformation like crazy, just like they used to do early on during the early propaganda wars. But the point I want to make actually here within my 15-minute part, excuse me, is I personally am alarmed at the role of large technology companies that are now suppressing different opinions. Because if you're going to suppress one opinion, you can suppress the next one in a few years. So all over the news in the last few days has been the fact that, for example, Facebook has chosen to maintain the block on ex-President Trump's account. But they've done it in a very strange way. They didn't make the decision. They basically created an external committee that would provide the advice for them. And the advice was the block should maintain, he can't have his account, but Facebook must explain to everyone why this is and when or if it'll be removed. Now, it doesn't matter if you agree with what President Trump said or his political opinions, in my opinion, because if they can block him, you know, if someone replaces Mark Zuckerberg next year and his political viewpoint is different than right now, they'll block someone else. So they are basically doing something that's called deplatforming people whose opinion doesn't kind of coincide with sort of accepted opinion. And that to me is the complete opposite of allowing free speech. Now, there are, of course, guidelines. You can't have complete nonsense. The example that would be everything that's going on with QAnon and all the stuff that they're spouting out about conspiracy theories and everything else. And people who are not, they don't look at enough different sources of information to understand that, you know, one piece of information is misleading. So all of us, that's when we were talking about journalism, need to become very attuned to different sources of information. So for example, every day when I'm looking at what the news is, I don't just look at ABC News or something. I look at the CBC from Canada. I look at the BBC. I look at NPR. I'm trying to get a broad range so that I can make my own informed opinion. But I don't want the voices of all these different sources to be suppressed by one guy sitting in Silicon Valley saying, I don't agree with it, so that's it, you're not going to do it. So when you're blocking people on Facebook and Twitter, what you're forcing them, of course, is they end up going, you might call it technologically underground. They go to different platforms, which for President Trump, he's already done as of today. And the people who are following him are not going to give up. They just switch their focus to these different groups. So canceling free speech based on a technology company, just like, for example, Amazon did when they canceled Parler, which was another sort of social media platform, I don't think is the way to go, not at all. And as soon as they start doing that, these technology companies change from being a carrier, like AT&T is for phone, to being a publisher, like a newspaper. And if you're a publisher, you then become liable for what things are on your platform. But they're doing it now. And I'm kind of surprised more people haven't been a little more upset, if you want, about this. And personally, I trust the general public to be able to make the proper decision about what's true and what's not. But suppressing the speech on these platforms, I don't think is the way to do it. So that's my main points.
Thank you, Dr. Tilley. We appreciate that very much. And I'm sure that we're going to get some questions and some good Q&A on that. And in fact, one of the things that I strongly encourage is actually some crosstalk between our panelists, so that as our panelists are especially as we complete each of our presentations, we don't just have to take questions from the audience. We can take, you guys can chat amongst yourselves, and we will all learn from that. It's wonderful. As I mentioned earlier, our one speaker, Patty Farley, was stuck out on I-95, and the wonderful thing is that she has made it safely here. So we're so glad to see Patty Farley with us, and Britt Kennerly has joined us. I know that she was running a little bit late, so we have all four of our panelists with us tonight. For those of you that are just joining us, our SCPA program for this evening's first Thursday event is called Free Speech. I'm right and you're wrong. And we're talking not just about the general concept of free speech, but about things that are happening in our society, in our country, and frankly around the world today, with extreme polarization, with people having a difficult time in civil discourse. And frankly, speaking of civil discourse, one of the people who I know has been literally at the center of the vortex of this for years is our next speaker, and that is Britt Kennerly. Britt is an experienced Florida Today journalist, current opinion page, community issues columnist. She manages the letters to the editor section of the paper, and boy, I tell you what, if you want to be in the middle of a tornado, Britt Kennerly is there. She's seen it, and so I'm going to pass the floor to you, Britt. It's great to have you back. Britt, please, you have the floor. Welcome.
Great. I am so glad to be back. And I want to tell Scott, I want to take that series of classes that you talked about. Those sound really fascinating, and I would love to talk to you about those. I will just start off by saying that what Phil said is so true. Whatever you think of Florida Today, whatever you think of what we do daily on our opinion page, I can tell you, first of all, that every day. We are not sitting, as we are accused of weekly, sitting around together deciding what will piss people off the most and then going in that direction. And then the next day saying, wait a minute, we have to veer to the other side today and piss people off over there too. We are a very small, as you know now, we've moved out of the big building. We are a much leaner and meaner staff than we have ever been. And we're all working out of our homes at this point for over a year now. And so the idea that we are not listening or that we are not trying to respond as well as we can to everyone in the community, some days that is true. When I was on vacation a couple of weeks ago, we have a new opinion page editor, John Torres. John had never handled letters to the editor. And I came back and there were a couple of letters that had run that I would have, I was sitting at home, you know, steam coming out of my head, you know, did anyone edit this letter? Because we set down ground rules years ago and we try to follow those as best we can. But over the last, especially over, I will say, without getting too political here, over the last 4 years, people have felt much more free to send us whatever talking points, as Scott talked about, the misinformation that's out there, the talking points, the bad info that's out there. I send that in a letter, verbatim, without checking sources. And so those letters are more numerous than ever. And I do have to take the time to respond to these people. And if they, and I try to talk to people about why their letter didn't run. And in the process of doing that, I am often accused of abridging their free speech. And that's why I wanted to share a little something that I did not realize until a few years ago that the case had been in, actually in Florida. But I tell people, yes, we absolutely have the right to refuse your letter to the editor. A newspaper can do that. And probably, I'm going to say a dozen times a month now, we are accused of, you've stripped away my First Amendment rights. I have every right. You must run this. Or it comes, the letter comes with a dare at the bottom. I bet you won't run this. Well, I can assure you that if that's at the bottom of the letter, it likely won't run, because once I've edited it and checked your sources, there'll be a really good chance that that letter is full of misinformation. So I wanted, as an example, to share something that came just this week. This man started off his letter by saying, throughout history, humans have baited animals to eat. As the animals became accustomed to the free food, they became the dinner. It is disappointing when this bait and switch is applied to politics. And he went on to talk about, in 1959, Khrushchev made this prediction regarding the future of America. Your children's children, you're probably familiar with the quote, we'll live under communists. You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright, but we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you finally wake up and find you already have communism. We will not have to fight you. We will so weaken your economy until you fall like overripe fruit into our hands. And then democracy will cease to exist, et cetera, et cetera. And when you take away from those who are willing to work and give to those who would not. He talked about how many people scoffed when Khrushchev made this prediction. And by this time, by the way, he was over the 250-word limit, like way past it. When he made that prediction, believing that America was a strong believer in personal freedom. And then he goes on about how today, and he named a lot of local names and names we all know, have used COVID-19 to justify giving stimulus money to make fearful people more dependent on the government. And employable people are now refusing jobs. And in his latest State of the Union speech, President Biden offered more free stuff. It appears that Khrushchev was right, and he goes on to quote Khrushchev again. I wrote back to this gentleman and told him, thank you for your letter, but two problems. Number one, from just a few years after I was born in 1956, there are references to Khrushchev saying what you quoted him here as saying, but there is no evidence. And I've talked to friends who are historians because I've talked about this quote in other places over the years, and it was so bizarre that this man brought it up just this week. I said, there is no evidence that he ever said this. There were questions dating to the early 60s as to whether it was fabricated. Here are several links debunking it, and they're from both sides of the aisle. Did Nikita Khrushchev say, we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism? Reuters, PolitiFact, Snopes, several different sites. And I said, and by the way, Biden's address was technically an address to Congress, not a State of the Union, because that's been the case now. I believe that Reagan was the first one in 1981 who actually, they called it an address to Congress for his first speech. So I thought, okay, this is good. And this man, maybe we can have a conversation about this. Instead, he sent back a letter that was full of race-baiting quotes about Jim Crow that were all absolutely untrue, and told me that, well, I won't tell you what he said I am, but it has been my experience that in dealing with these people, telling them about the Supreme Court addressing, and I'm pulling this up here, address the issue of editorial content and freedom of the press in 1974. I was a high school senior. It happened. It was the Miami Herald Publishing Company. It concerned a Florida political candidate who brought suit against the Miami Herald about the right to reply statute after the paper refused to give him equal space. And the statute in question required a newspaper to provide equal space to a political candidate to reply to any criticism of the character's personal character or official record printed by the newspaper. And anyway, the Supreme Court found the statute unconstitutional in that it violated the First Amendment right to a free press. I have shared that at least, I'm going to say, 50 times over the last 4 years. And in every case, the person I share it with has said, you're something to the effect of, you are a liberal rag, you are not listening to your community, this is not what we want. And I reply as politely as I did to the last man, you have every right to send your letter. We absolutely have a right not to publish it. And if I had to go back and look at how letters have changed and how that idea has changed, I can tell you that I've been working at newspapers since 1989. I've been the editor of a small paper. I've been on the opinion page. I've been an associate editor, a features editor. I have never seen the lack of dialogue that I am seeing now that is actually, as Scott talked about, an open dialogue that is, so I've never seen such dialogue that is so fact-free on many days. I'll put it nicely that way. But I can assure you that we are looking for voices on that page. John and I have talked a lot about what we want to see on that page as far as columnists. We do want that debate. And I think tomorrow you'll be seeing a good example of giving every side of an issue their say in some columns that we're running tomorrow on the homelessness problem in Melbourne and the decision recently made by council there. So I just want to assure you that we are listening, but I am working as hard as I can to tackle those very problems that Scott talked about dissemination of bad information. And I'll say quickly too, that as far as comments on our stories and comments on our Facebook pages, we are talking about ways to tackle those as well, because we are spending more time now, sometimes moderating comments than actually working on important, I will say, fact-filled stories. So thank you.
Britt, thank you so much. Britt, and by the way, both Britt and Scott, I'm sorry that we're here virtually, but I tell you what, if you were in our normal setting, I'm sure you'd be getting a standing ovation. We'd be getting for all of our speakers a very warm welcome, and it's great to have all of you. And it's something that has to be mentioned, and that is that, especially in this sort of environment that just seems to be so superheated, journalists are at grave risk. Not only do they receive threats, journalists are dying. Not only in the United States, but around the world, because they're out doing the work of collecting the truth and disseminating it to us. I cannot imagine a world in which the Fourth Estate was not here to support us, to educate us, to tell the truth. And in that sense, I would like to, for just a moment, make a shameless support of our previous editor of Florida Today, Bob Gabordi. He wrote this wonderful book called The Truth, and it talks about this subject. We've had Bob as a guest, as a panelist before at SCPA. He's written this wonderful book talking about his career and the amount of threats and harassment that he has faced in his career. And Britt, I can't imagine what you see on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I wanted to add really quickly. I have been increasingly worried about that over the last couple of years, especially with people looking up addresses, et cetera, because I will say, I go by the office every few days now, actually, to pick up mail. And we have gotten some pretty dicey and a little off-putting letters recently. And they're all, I will say, mostly regarding racial issues.
It's a difficult time to say it, to put it at the least. Well, let us continue. Our next speaker, Patty Farley. As I said earlier, Patty is president of the Democratic Women's Club of Florida, professional educator. And again, I could go on and on about all of her accolades and her involvement in our community, but I'd rather let her talk. Patty, please, welcome. You have the floor, and it's great to have you. I hope the traffic wasn't too bad out there.
It was horrible. We were stopped for 2 hours. But thank you, and thank you for the invite to be here.
Welcome.
And I decided that what I would address on the issue of free speech, and it's all right, as a retired teacher of 31 years, I wanted to give you an idea of the issues that arise in a public school classroom involving free speech. That way I'm not being extremely political, just the issues of free speech. And you can tell me when I need to stop, because I was told I had about 15 minutes. Okay. The Supreme Court clarified in Tinker versus Des Moines that public school students do not give up their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate. And public school students enjoy First Amendment protection depending upon the type of expression involved and their age. Also, public school teachers, as public employees, do not forfeit all of their First Amendment rights to free expression when they accept employment, both in pursuing and in imparting education to others. Public school teachers have somewhat academic freedom with limitations that's also justified by the maturity of their students. That's what comes into questions. And the courts have ruled on several cases involving the teachers' expressive rights here. But to just what is academic freedom? And I'm going to just rattle off a whole bunch of stuff here to let you see just how much First Amendment is involved in public school teaching, and you would not think it is. But the tenure system, the whole purpose, we have lost tenure for public school teachers and a lot of university professors. And the whole purpose of tenure was that so teachers could feel an assurance of continuous employment and have a freedom to teach to the best of their ability And also the idea that you don't have tenure means that a teacher no longer has continuous employment. And how are you able to buy something long-term credit, such as a house or a car, if you don't have continuous employment that you can show? So that is really hurting our teachers. The right to unionize is free speech. Whether there are cameras in the classroom, cameras on the campus, cameras on the buses, and cameras filming teachers as to determine what they teach and how they teach, all involve the issue of free speech in a classroom. Book banning, what somebody might call red flagging is a common term for it. Also, the fact that parents form committees to pre-read, they call it previewing, but it's red flagging textbooks to find out what is appropriate in their opinion and who decides what appropriate means. We have a lot of overzealous parent groups trying to control students' exposure to literature. Children and young adult books are the overwhelming majority of banned books. In the period between 2000 and 2009, which is what I could find here, there were over 5,099 young adult books challenged or banned, and that's only the ones that the American Library Association had records of. So they figured that that was maybe only 1/4 of them. Now, the first step in helping to counter these hovering parental controls is to educate people what the First Amendment is really about and the importance of diversity in children's books. And that brings me to the Texas Board of Education. I don't know how many of your watchers tonight know that textbooks are actually separately written for Texas. There will be a group here, and I have gone into textbook reviews, and then there may be the Florida textbook, and then there will be the Texas textbook. And they are rewritten because of the political power of a particular group who are usually lay people, not educators, not historians, and certainly not scientists, who want all references to anything about evolution taken out of books. They have their own version of what is historically correct, involving different topics, and they have their own version of what is scientifically correct according to their lay committee. Now, you buy separate textbooks for these groups now, and this is not helping us form independent, critical thinking citizens that we hope a democracy has and urgently needs when you have this going on. And it also goes on in Tennessee, I might say. Did you know that teachers had a gag order on them when it comes to standardized testing? A lot of people don't know this. And if you hold down a teaching position in the public school, you're required to give that standardized test. But before you're allowed to give it, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement and have it notarized. You're forced to do this. You really don't have a choice if you hold down your job. Now, in this non-disclosure agreement, it's part that you cannot say or do anything about that test to anyone. Now, I know I have seen questions on the test. Pearson is one of the big test distributors. But if you buy Pearson textbooks, some of the questions on that test, if that child uses a Pearson textbook, they will be better able to answer than if they use a different brand of textbook. And that makes that test biased and unfair, in my opinion, because it meant that the school board, in order to advance their test scores, would want to buy Pearson textbooks. So I just say to you on that, what do we do and why are we doing this to our children and making them so distraught over this? And I'll interject also, I've been to Tallahassee, I've spoke to committees and told them about our children throwing up during these testing procedures. And all I can say is you follow the money to Pearson and see what's going on there. But teachers are under gag rules. And I don't know, I might be able to be sued for saying what I just did here. but I'm retired, so they can't fire me anymore. Justice Clarence Thomas is a member of the Supreme Court who has openly said that he doesn't think children should have the right of free speech. I don't know if he considers them property of their parents, but in his statement, that's pretty much what it seems that he felt. Graduation speeches are always the subject of controversy in high school, and what's going to be said and can they be controlled. And the location of the graduation ceremony should come under question. In our own county here, several times the graduation ceremony has been held in some of our large churches, and students who weren't of that denomination, such as maybe if they were held in a Christian Baptist type church, the students who were Jewish or Muslim did not attend their own graduation ceremony. I always questioned that one myself, but that never came about. Prayer in school is still an issue, even though they're not as such praying over the intercom system. We still have a moment of silence. And in this last legislative session, while I was in Tallahassee, one of our local people here was promoting a bill that, in the fine words of the bill, it talked about what students were supposed to think during that moment of silence. Now, anybody has had a teenager or worked with a teenager, you don't tell that teenager what they can think. And we were trying to legislate what children should think during the moment of silence. I found that very humorous. The Pledge of Allegiance. It was in 1943 that the Supreme Court said that you could not force students to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, it was very eloquent in their discussion, and they made it about freedom of speech and not about religion. And then later the under God came into the Pledge of Allegiance in the 50s. But in the 40s, the Supreme Court said they didn't have to do the Pledge of Allegiance. And I started teaching in the mid 70s. And I know through the 70s and 80s that I taught, many of my students were suspended for refusing to stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, so hairstyles, hair length is a major issue, and the definition in the public school system is whether it's a disruption or not. Now, how a hairstyle or color can be a disruption, it is defined as a disruption. Natural African-American hairstyles for years were termed disruption. Now they're getting better on this, but we have a case right now that people are probably familiar with where a young girl in Michigan, 7 years old, went to school and her hair, half of her hair was cut off on the school bus. And her father, she was crying. She was a biracial child with a natural haircut. And now 7-year-old little girl, she came home crying. Her father took her to a salon and had a very expensive haircut put on her to try to even up the style and the size. She went to school the next day and the teacher cut the other half off to match the half. So you'll probably hear some things in the courts about this soon on the hairstyles. But whether it's blue, green, or purple, some schools will say that that's not the right of a student's free speech. However, homeschooling is another issue. It is through your concept of free speech that parents can homeschool their children. And today, all 50 states now allow parents to homeschool. And they recognize the rights of parents to educate at home, but some states do require the parents to do particular things or show so many hours of instruction during the time period. Hand gestures, and this goes out into public, not just schools, but it's big in schools because you're dealing with kids, is a hand gesture, the use of the middle finger. How obscene is this? Okay. Is it enough to get a kid expelled from school for doing a hand gesture? These are questions. Music censorship. Music, the Supreme Court says, is artistic expression, but within the school, music can be challenged on claims that it's obscene, it might incite violence, or it may be harmful to minors on music. The whole issue of political correctness, I'm going to hit on for just a second. Who defines what's politically correct for our students? They have to be politically correct in the school, but who's going to define it? And if we're trying to develop public consciousness, are we trying to develop how we speak about an issue as more important than focusing on the real problem of discrimination and misogyny and homophobia? Are we just talking about it correctly, or are we actually trying to fix a problem, is a question I raise here tonight. Profanity, libel, hate speech, fighting words, all of these cause great issues in a school system. But what can be said and what can be worn on your clothes comes into play. Now, also, what can be interpreted. If a bandana worn in a particular way, is that a signal of a gang sign? If a bandana worn around your leg means you're in a gang, what right does the school do to that student? We are in a social media age. We're in the age of the internet, cyberbullying, cyber stalking, revenge porn of high school students. Most parents don't want to think of that, but at least once a week, you got revenge porn. Kids go together, they send texts, sexting, whatever, but nude photos are going around the school like crazy, and they break up, and then they're going to show them to everybody, okay? These are issues, and we have had hundreds of teenagers from Florida south end to the northest part of our country, suspended from school over extracurricular activities for creating on their own time on a weekend their own videos and posting them online. And how much does the school have the right to police that child's social media sites because they're a student at that school? This is an issue of free speech. And this is an issue right now in the courts that the Supreme Court is going to have to rule on this summer. We have a cheerleader who posted over the weekend, and she said it out, F you to my school and all of this stuff. And she was taken off her cheerleading squad. And the Supreme Court is going to have to decide whether the school actually has the right to take kids off over their home social use of it, social media. So this is a big one. In Kansas, they can fire and terminate teachers over a teacher's social media site and have done so.
Patricia, you have 2 minutes.
Oh dear. Okay. So I'll try to sum up quickly and thank you. But basically, there's lots of issues from parental rights to the use of sports logos and whether they're acceptable or not, such as rebels with Confederate flags and use of Native Americans as issues. But we have our school boards running scared. They're terrified of what's happening. Parents have the school boards terrified, and nobody's standing up for the First Amendment and the students' rights. Now, at the end of this, are we going to come back and talk about solutions to this, Phil?
I think the opportunity is going to be, especially in the Q&A section.
Okay, well, then I'll hold off on some of what I said.
No, please, you can continue. You've got a couple minutes, please continue.
These are things that we need to address and make sure that students have information. To deprive them of information is depriving them from an education. Absences only sex education is not sex education. Okay, it doesn't work in today's society. We had Tucker Carlson on television this last week talking about complaining that the government had no right to control his body and make him wear a mask. And all I could think about was no right to control my body. And I'm thinking of invasive ultrasounds that I've been in Tallahassee fighting for years. And the idea that they want to control women's bodies, whether they can have an abortion or not, but Tucker Carlson does not want the government to control his body. And our students are being relegated to free speech zones, maybe 15 by 15 foot square wide on a school patio, where if they walk out to that patio, they can use their free speech. Now, these are issues that every high school teacher deals with every day, and it all is free speech. And we have to rise above and understand what our First Amendment really means here. Okay, now, thank you, Phil. You gave me a platform to vent with. Thank you.
Patty, all of us are giving you a round of applause. I really genuinely believe that you'd be getting a standing ovation if we were meeting at our Front Street Civic Center location that we normally meet in. It's very interesting. Teachers, journalists, community leaders, politicians, so many people are facing threats, facing harassment, facing challenges that seem to be getting worse rather than better. This is a very difficult time in our society, and the fact that we're able to talk about this here at this event today is so important. And I'm so glad you're here, Patty. And I'll tell you what, let's make certain that we talk about solutions. And in fact, one of the things that I like to ask of our guests whenever we have a panel, I'm going to ask our 4 panelists today, and that is that we would like to give our audience action items. So be thinking about it. We always like to have at least one and maybe several action items so that folks that when they leave this event, they can have something that they can do. A letter to write, just something you can do, something that you've got in mind. I think, Patty, you probably are going to have some suggestions for action items for our audience. And by the way, something that you mentioned actually, and we'll come back to it later, but if you're in London and you're in one of the parks, I can't remember which one it is, they actually have a corner. It's called Speaker's Corner because the British government has some fairly well-established limitations on free speech. But you can go to Speaker's Corner and say anything you want, with the exception of the fact that you're not allowed to attack the Queen. And Linda and I have been there on a number of occasions, and it's a rather entertaining thing to go there. People come with the milk crate, flop it on the ground, they jump up onto it, and they start talking about whatever's on their mind, and that's intriguing. Anyway, that's a subject maybe for later. But thank you so much, Patty. Great to have you. I'm so glad you were able to beat your way through the traffic to join us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our final speaker tonight, Barb Segura. Barb is a licensed clinical mental health counselor, certified addiction counselor, and as I had said earlier in the program, so much more. But our final speaker this evening does not mean that the conversation ends here. Of course, as Barb winds down, it will create an opportunity, certainly for the panel, to talk to each other. And we will open the floor for those of you that are here joining us on Zoom. We'll open up your mics. We'll take your questions. The way that we'll be doing that, by the way, is that on Zoom, if you go to somewhere on your screen, depending on your platform, whether you're on a phone or an iPad or a computer, somewhere on there, there's a small thing that says reactions, where you can open that up and you'll be able to raise your hand. And what we'll do is, if we see that you've got your hand raised, we'll call on you so that you can speak. I see at least one person that's already got their hand up at the close of our presentation. So let's move on to Barb. Barb Segura, you have the floor.
Thank you.
You're
Hi,
welcome.
everyone. I'm glad to be here and part of this great event. The information I'll be sharing with you tonight comes from years of research at the Institute of Labor and Mental Health, led by Rabbi Michael Lerner. He was a researcher there, social worker, and founder of the Network of Spiritual Progressives. at spiritualprogressives.org. It is with this network that I recently took a class on the material I'm going to share with you tonight. So for the next 15 minutes, I'd like to take some time to breathe together, to become conscious of our connections with each other, to introduce two worldviews, to talk about the divide between the left and the right, and how to build an inclusive social change movement, and then to talk about how to bring these views in a practical way into our communities. So we'll take a moment just to look around the Zoom space, connect, breathe, still our bodies, notice our heartbeat, release any tension we might be feeling in our bodies from sitting, and recognize that we breathe in what nature provides us, and we breathe out and we provide for nature. We are connected to all sentient beings, to the bugs in the lawn, to the trees. And in this moment of stillness, quiet, we recognize that we, in our human bodies, have common ground with others who do not see the world the same way we do. So, welcome back. The flyer advertising tonight's event quotes Robert V. Taylor, president of the Desmond Tutu Foundation, saying, "You don't create peace by talking with people that agree with you. Peace comes from having a dialogue with people that are different from you." So here we are, the last 4 years, the pandemic, the insurrection, George Floyd and others, nature that is in deep suffering, voting rights being removed in Republican state legislatures, and the list goes on. We're in a pivotal time in our history, a time that will require much more than a change of administration, a time that requires a change of individual and collective consciousness, and a change to the very systems and structures on which our society was founded and functions. So I'm going to invite you to imagine with me two worldviews: a world where love and collaboration are the norm, where values of compassion, abundance, and care are brought to life every day, where people feel secure in their communities and in the world, and interconnected to the environment, where all humans are sacred and every human life is worthy of respect and dignity just because, with nothing to prove, and where there is a sacred relationship with nature, and where even economies and governments consider the relationship of their policies to how the earth is affected by them. Just imagine. Do you yearn for this type of world? Now contrast this with the worldview we have been raised in of scarcity, individualism, self-reliance, and fear. We've been taught that if someone else gets ahead, we will not. So what we have to do is maximize our own self-interest without regard to the well-being of other people. It's fear and domination, competition over cooperation, the sense that there is not enough for everyone, and so I have to grab what I can. A principle of scarcity is that some will go without, and people have been going without, and this worldview is not working. We know there's plenty, even though scarcity is what we've been taught, and decades of greed and the self-interest of a few have brought us to facing extinctions of human and planetary life. For example, in which world would you feel accepted or safe in? Imagine you're sick with COVID or cancer or another long-term illness. Which world? I don't have to tell you, we live in a meritocracy, where a person's level of success, whether personal or professional, is a reflection of our skill and value as a human being. Yet we know that is not true. There are systems and structures in our society that shape and limit the opportunities we have. Yes, some can move up the economic ladder, but surprisingly few. And those who do make it are held up as an example to say, see, if you just worked harder and were smarter, you could make it too. This perpetuates the false narrative that if we fail to make it, it's our fault. I want you to hear that this message creates a self-blaming story in each one of us, a self-blaming story. Namely, that it's your fault if you've not achieved enough or been successful enough, or fill in the blank. And blaming others for the lot that has befallen them comes from a worldview of fear and scarcity. Do you have a self-blaming story? Maybe one that keeps you up at night? A self-blaming of a time when you've looked at someone else and thought, they are so much better and more successful than me. What's wrong with me? I know I do it sometimes. Yet self-blaming is not fundamental to our humanity. Babies do not come into the world blaming others and shaming themselves. Babies do not think, wait, something must be wrong with me. That baby over there is rolling over and sitting up, but I'm not. And we can laugh at the absurdity of this, but at some point in our lives, we're taught to judge ourselves in comparison to others. And if and when we fall short, because we always fall short of someone, we beat ourselves up and tell ourselves something is wrong with us. I say this to say that our worldview of scarcity, individualism, greed, and self-reliance create self-blaming stories. Self-blame, fear, and shame keeps us from connection. And connection is what every human yearns for. And these two worldviews, or stories that live within each of us, form how we treat others and ourselves, both in and outside our movements, at home, at work, and in all of our activities and relationships. They infuse the way we talk about and engage in politics, in the way we create policies, and even how we build and participate in our social change movements. We can learn to notice this. And the worldview of love is a threat to the worldview of fear, self-reliance, and independence. The worldview of love is a threat to the worldview of fear and self-reliance and independence. So now I want to say something about the right and the left. The right, in extremely distorted ways, tells people that their pain is real, that their inability to achieve the success they want is not their fault, but rather they explain that the worldview of competition, scarcity, profit, and greed, which is imprinted in the fabric of our society and systems, is the issue. They place the blame on the other. Immigrants, people of color, Jews, Muslims, LGBTQ people, women, socialists, and now all liberals. They're told that these others are standing in the way of their rightful place among the elite and powerful. The right makes people feel like they matter, even though we know their policies do just the opposite. Just listen to Trump's words on January 6th. You're good people, you're patriots. I love you. I feel your pain. Your right to be angry. This election, i.e. your way of life, has been stolen from you. And this soothes their pain. This soothes their pain. One of the challenges to the left is that we can sometimes tend to demean the right. We tend to dismiss fundamental religious beliefs as flawed and backwards. We ridicule them in our social media posts, in our conversations, and on and on. And both sides can be fixated on the fact that others have privilege that they do not have based on color and gender. I ask, why do we continue to blame each other? Yes, there are systems of structures of inequality and injustice that leave some with more advantages than others. But those with real power pit us against each other. Those with real power pit us against each other. People yearn for a world in which their needs for meaning, purpose, belonging, and connection and love and care are met. Imagine a left who could speak to these needs in real ways and create a society that shows real subjective caring. What if we, the left, could be the champion of the diversity of faith and belief? This doesn't mean accepting that falsehoods are true, but rather understanding that views different than ours are worthy of our respect. We can always disagree with their policies and their positions and even how they interpret and understand their own religious teachings. I think it's important to recognize that we often see through a perspective of fear and scarcity instead of seeing each other's humanity. This is prophetic empathy, being able to listen to the stories of others with compassion, reflection, and skill, considering how the worldview of fear and scarcity creates the perspective that they and sometimes we take. If we find ways of connecting with the right through universal values of genuine kindness and caring, we may be able to have the difficult conversations when we've created an opening to do so. The path from the worldview of fear to the worldview of love is paved with conversations of empathy and prophetic empathy. So how do we build a social change movement that includes values of love, abundance, nurturance, care, and interconnectedness? Well, we begin to ask the questions. We inquire among ourselves, among our leaders, our members, and we seek to understand. Does our movement follow principles that all humans are sacred? Does our movement include policy proposals that consider our relationship to the environment? How do we help move individual and social energy towards a worldview of love and abundance and interdependence? First and foremost, we must do this with love in our hearts. And I can't simply tell you these things. We have to engage in deep listening with curiosity. But if all we do is empathize, we may temporarily soothe people's pain, and that is important, but we'll not be providing them with an alternative worldview and understanding. We will not be helping them see that the internal conflict that resides within them and us, between the world in which we live and the world in which their deepest selves yearn for. Prophetic empathy shares the alternative worldview and focuses on universal yearnings for safe neighborhoods, clean water and air, connection to nature, where animals and plant life are factored into our decisions at all levels of government. So we've covered a lot. We've taken some time to feel, to breathe, to notice that we're connected to each other and to our environment. I hope we've taken some time to expand our consciousness a bit. I've shared the concept of two worldviews, one of scarcity and competition, and another of love and abundance. We've touched on the divide between the right and the left and proposed how the left can build an inclusive social change movement. We've talked about empathy as not just listening to others that we have disagreements with, but connecting the self-blaming stories we hear to the worldview of scarcity, and to listen more, and to be the kindness, the generosity, and the compassion we want to see, to be that in our homes, in our work, in our schools, in our local organizations and governments. So you'll find all this information and learn much, much more at the Network of Spiritual Progressives at spiritualprogressives.org. They have ongoing training and support to bring the worldview of love and caring into our communities and local governments. What are some possible next steps? You could consider being part of a Revolutionary Love book club. You could consider training in spiritual activism. You could consider dialoguing with people different from yourself. Just as stated by Mr. Taylor, that we don't create peace by talking with people that agree with us. Peace comes from the dialogue with people that are different than us. So will you imagine with me, and will you imagine our community strategizing to create a caring community? I hope so. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Barb. And again, if you were in a room, I'm sure you'd be getting a standing ovation. It's one of the strange things about Zoom, of course, and that is that it's hard to clap in unison and to cheer for somebody, to say thanks. But we all, I hope that all four of our panelists feel the love and the thanks for being here tonight to talk about this tough issue. These tough issues. This isn't just about speech. It's about communication. It's about what kind of a society do we want to live in. And again, this is not something that just happened yesterday. The question of communication and mutual respect, having a civil discourse, has been an issue for as long as humans have been speaking to each other, I suspect. But anyway, now it's time for us to open the floor and to encourage questions from those of us that are on Zoom. Again, I encourage dialogue between our four panelists. You can ask each other questions. If you got comments, if you liked something somebody else said, if you want to finish somebody else's sentence for them, it's good for the rest of us when the whole group talks. Our first question tonight, I see Claudia Thomas has her hand up. So let's see, Daniel's got his hand up. Daniel, are you asking a question? You had a comment.
I've actually got a question for Scott.
Well, I think Claudia actually had.
Claudia had you beat. She had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, she's had her hand up for a while. Go ahead, Claudia.
With your permission, sir, we'll go to Claudia Thomas. Claudia, you are mute. Maybe you're muted. Can we hear you? Claudia, you are muted. Yeah, now you're up.
I was muted. I was waiting for permission to unmute.
You're up.
And I was going to pass to Dan because DP, I'll always give a shout out to him and talk. So make sure you get to him when I'm done.
Yes.
First, Scott, Patty, Britt, and Beth, Barb, thank you so much for speaking to us. I just love hearing from all of you. Florida Today is near and dear to my heart because I find myself defending the paper so often. So Britt, you've probably seen I do comment occasionally on articles. Embedded journalism, right on, girl, keep it up. It seems, and this is probably not surprising, that there aren't that many people who put in comments. I'm seeing the same names pretty regularly. And I don't know if that means you're not getting as many people commenting. We know that, most people are on other types of social media. But I think my question is, would you like it if we promoted more people to read more digitally or otherwise and comment so we know they're out there? Or are you already overwhelmed with trying to review all the comments that are there? What can I do to help you?
We're finding that the comment sections don't provide much of a dialogue that is beneficial, or it's most often very one-sided, or it's mean, and it's fairly useless. So what I've actually gone out to many places in meetings and through letters to different organizations over the last few months, encouraging them. And this was what I was going to bring up when we talked about action we can take. I encourage people to write real letters to the editor. And we are going to actually start promoting those more in a better way to get not only the better dialogue in the comments section, but also to showcase some of the better letters that we're getting or that we get. We don't get them every day. And yes, you're absolutely right. We do get a lot of the same names. And I will say, quite honestly, they're mostly, I would say 75% of them are still coming from white men past 70. And so that's where I've gone out recently and tried to encourage young conservatives, young progressives, everyone, high schoolers, to write letters to the editor. And then I guess my final thing I would say to that is I would encourage people to, if you have that conservative person in your family and you have an issue that you argue about, write letters, but feel free to submit a column idea. If you remember the old SNL, Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin, we don't want you to go quite that far with calling each other names, but John Torres and I have talked about doing that ourselves, since many times we come from very different places on the same issue. But yes,
like Michael Che.
Real letters.
Thank you, Britt. And we'll keep defending.
Yes.
Well, that means that Daniel, DP, you've got you got the floor with your question.
I've actually got two. I've got one from Facebook, but I'll leave that one to the end. Nobody else has asked a question on Facebook yet. My biggest question is for Scott. I'm a computer nerd. I've been coding since I was 8 years old, and lately I've been dabbling in AI as well. And what you said about AI-generated fake news kind of stuck with me there. And I've seen it. I've seen it all over the internet. Not just headlines, but entire articles of AI-generated text that you can get a couple of sentences in and not realize that it's total crap until you finally reach the bottom and realize that there is no continuity. There's no genuine topic here. But my question is, now, if AI can generate fake news, I know you have the ability to create a second AI, a neural net that can detect fake news, but is there a way to put those two together, like a generative adversarial network that both generates and detects fake news, and they kind of build on each other so that at the end product of this GAN can more accurately detect and thwart the spread of this misinformation? Before I let you answer that real quick, the other question was from Scott Rook, and this one goes to Britt Kennerly. Does Florida Today screen comments on their social media posts that share similar falsehoods as letters to the editor? But I'll pass it to you first, Scott.
Okay, let me just preface my answer by kind of addressing the thing that Britt was just talking about. So, I wrote for Florida Today as well for over 8 years. And after a few years, I gave up responding to comments on forums and stuff because of the vitriolic nature of the comments that came in. Occasionally they were positive. I occasionally got even, written nice letters, but otherwise they were just terrible. And I just tuned them out. And now it's worse than ever. But as for your question about neural networks and AI, you already read news every day generated by AI. You may not know it, but you do. There's all kinds of news articles, weather, sports, financial news. It's all generated by programs. No one's writing them. A couple of years ago, the Wall Street Journal actually ran a little competition between one of their columnists and an AI program, and then they asked people to determine whether or not they thought it was, which one was better. And they couldn't determine which one was which. That's why we actually covered fake news in journalism, because it's in such disarray right now. Do the articles, do the programs that are used to determine fake news? Yes, there is a feedback loop between things that are generated, things that are produced by people, and then these detection algorithms to determine whether or not this is real or fake. And the detection algorithms, of course, they go to all kinds of different sources, which is one of the comments I was going to make. So, because the question was, do we have action items, from the end of this conversation? And one of the action items is everyone needs to become more of an informed consumer of news, not one source. They've got to come from multiple sources, but it's not easy, right? It's not easy to determine what is reasonable, what is trustworthy news sources. And most people these days can barely read one source of news, never mind reading 2, 3, 4 sources of news each day. Now, the algorithms can. However, it's much easier to produce fake news than it is to determine fake news. And that's where our current situation is. We've got it's very easy to have a program to produce literally thousands of articles that have little bits of truth in them and lots of fake news. And then it becomes very difficult to pull out one from the other. And the average news consumer just simply doesn't have the time, the energy, the wherewithal to be able to determine which is which. That's where we are.
Before we move on to Britt's answer to the inquiry about their social media feed, many times science fiction examines things that are current. There was a science fiction film made quite a few years ago called Earth 2, where they actually were depicting a political debate going on, and on the bottom of the screen was they weren't using the term AI, but it is, of course, what they were talking about, is essentially a computer was listening to the debate, and it was fact-checking the people real time on the bottom of the screen with, referenced data, basically saying, the statement that was just made is not correct, or is, is an embellishment. It's kind of an interesting concept, the way that many times after watching a political debate on television, we watch commentators then analyze what was said. It's a curious thought. And I'll come back to Professor Tilley after we go to Britt. Britt, the question to you from our Facebook Live feed was, does Florida Today edit the content that's running on your, social media platform?
Well, if you're talking about our Facebook page, that is not done locally in its entirety. Company-wide, we are working on that. I cannot tell you exactly how that's going to be moderated in the next few months, but there's going to be a change. Locally, we do monitor as much as possible. Several of us check throughout the day, and we do turn in comments that we find, absolutely offensive or full of bad information. But no, they are not, I will say they are not moderated in any way, shape, or form to the extent that, say, a letter to the editor would be.
And Professor, I know that I've seen this, and probably everybody here has, but the concept of AI moderating or manipulating written materials or text. There is also AI CG generated video and audio that can be created. It's being created, and it is as lifelike as humanly imaginable. When you go to a movie these days and you watch the action and the airplanes are crashing and the people are fighting and all this stuff, it has become so lifelike that it is virtually impossible to tell reality from fantasy. And we know that this is coming to the political world, where we will be able, people will be, and probably already are, creating videos and voiceovers that sound just like the original person. They may be actual sections of their voices blended together in a way to say something that they never said, or to have them appear to be doing something that they never did. Dr. Tilley, have you ever seen that? Can you talk about that?
Yes, the term used in the AI world for that are called deep fakes. And deep fakes are already prevalent all over the internet. Probably one example that most people are familiar with was from during the last election cycle, where someone manipulated a video of the Democratic speaker in the House, Nancy Pelosi, where they slowed down her speech to give the impression that she was kind of having a stroke, or she was drunk or something like that. But it was her. But you can find other deep fake videos online right now. Just go on Google and just Google deep fake something, and it's almost impossible to detect whether or not it's actually real or not. So people's reputations, if you want, and therefore their political views and their everything else related to them, is being manipulated by these algorithms that change the visual perception of what the people are doing and how they're acting. So you can have one act, for example, in a movie, one actor placed in another movie. They were never in the movie, but you would never, ever be able to detect that now, because the algorithms are so efficient, if you want. Now, just like in fake news, all of these things are like a chess match. You've got someone doing a fake news, and you've got someone trying to detect it. You have someone doing deep fakes, and you have another algorithm trying to detect it. The problem is, in all of these things, they're like cybersecurity. The adversary, the cybersecurity person, they only need to succeed once. The defense has to succeed all the time. So it's not a very even match. And so once these videos get out, and many people will just go online, go to YouTube or whatever, and they're looking to see what their latest congressperson is talking about, and they see these deep fakes about expressing opinions that in fact they don't hold. Like, you would never know it, because you can't tell that it's not real from simply looking at it on a video. You just can't.
That creates about the ultimate problem that a society can face. Barb, I know, Barb Segura, you had your hand up. You had something to say?
I just wanted to comment on this topic of, I think it is important to figure out how to tell what news is fake and what is not. It reminds me of raising adolescents, where adolescents believe for a very long time that their way is right and their parents just, have no idea.
Yeah, until they get older.
Until they get older, right. And over time, they begin to discern for themselves, what direction in life they want to take, what they want to, values they want to take from their family. I would say that as an example that sometimes I would go back and forth before I got really stressed out over dialogue with family members and friends who didn't see things the same way I did. We'd send videos back and forth and YouTubes and this, and, read each other's stuff and comment, and we really didn't get anywhere. What helped me break through with my Trump family members was me saying, what did you learn from that video? What did you take away? And, where can we agree? Where can we, do you think that a minimum wage, a fair minimum wage is good? Do you think, so I would change the topic to, do you think that the government should take care of homeless people? Do you think, so I say these things as, ways of connecting. And also, one thing that has helped me a lot is to have friends from other countries. And Zoom has allowed that over this past year and a half in my hibernation. So I ask them how they see America, how they see the president, how they see what's going on. And then I ask them what their news sources are. And I go online and listen to news from, I know, God forbid, I listen to news from Russia, but I do listen to news from, other places, France, you can find all kinds of news. Pick a country that you've wanted to go visit and watch their news and see how they portray America. And you learn a lot. And you broaden your worldview. So that's what I'd like to add.
Yeah, that's great advice for everyone, is to step outside and look in. And I tell you what, for what it's worth, for those of you that have access to the New York Times, they published a magnificent video today about people in other countries looking at America's environmental policy, our approach to managing waste, our approach to managing global climate change. It is a magnificent video.
Yes.
It's very much worth looking for. So my hat's off to the New York Times on that one.
Mhm.
Patty, you have your hand up. Patty Farley.
Yes, when we're dealing with all of the different things that they're doing on internet with fake news, that gets so involved that it's just unbelievable. But on a more simplistic level, about, I guess it was about 12 years ago, when Bill Nelson ran an election and he won one of his re-elections. Channel 13 ran an ad, and it was on his voting record, and it was an ad on Bill Nelson's voting record on Medicare. And it was all false. And not being at that time thinking better of a TV channel network, I called them to correct them. And I said, you're making a huge error. You need to take that down. That's not his voting record. I know his voting record. And that is probably the voting record of the Bill Nelson that is out from the Midwest, who is a Republican. And you're sharing the wrong Bill Nelson's voting record. And I was so naive that I thought that was probably what they were doing. And they said, you don't understand, that's an ad. And I said, but it's incorrect. You need to get that down as quickly as possible. And they said, no, there's no truth in advertising. People just pay us to put on ads, and we will say anything they pay us to say.
Mm.
So if we could change that aspect and just get back to the truth in advertising, that was the old-fashioned basic truth that we had before that law was changed, I think we might improve some of what goes around.
May the buyer beware.
Yeah.
I'm sure, Britt, Scott, you probably have some interesting perspectives on that.
Well, when the comment was just made about the advertising, I was thinking again about QAnon, which I mentioned briefly during my little talk. I'm not sure how familiar people are with QAnon, but the bizarre stories that are circulated through this group, they're certainly not fact-checked because they're just, kind of bizarre. And the thing is, because they're pushed through so many different social media platforms, and also people who they're called now influencers. These are people who have a lot of power on social media, that anyone I call them social silos. Basically people, for example, on Facebook, the more you like the news you get the same kind of news all the time. Mm-hmm. You do not get other perspectives. So it keeps reinforcing your perspective or your viewpoint, to the point that you were talking about social discourse. It becomes impossible because there's like, if this was a Venn diagram, there's no overlap in these groups. And these are all, again, driven by algorithms that keep talking about, if you like this, if you click on this, you get more of it and more of it and more of it, which is why I said we need to become more informed news consumers. Was just talking about, if you want to read or get news from France or Russia or Hong Kong or wherever, do it. You really need to have multiple perspectives on what's going on in the world so that you become a little bit more informed. Otherwise, you're totally siloed in your own possibly fake news world. And the more you get it, the more that it just keeps reinforcing your worldview. And when people we're talking about free speech, when people have a different perspective and they want to talk about something different, you're just not open to it at all. It's like, nope, I already know what the world is like. I know what this fact is all about. I don't need to listen to you. And it's just getting worse.
And for our guests on Zoom, I encourage you to go take a look at the chat if you haven't been looking, especially going right back up to Barb. There's a wonderful posting that explains some links to her points. And back to you, Britt. I think, Britt, did you want to respond?
I just actually sent you a direct message. You may not have seen it. I hate this. I have to run. I have a family member who had surgery this morning, and I need to reach her before she goes to sleep because I know she's taking some pretty heavy painkillers right now. But I just want to encourage everyone again to contact me with any questions at all. And but as I said, I need to run because I know I'm getting text messages from the family saying that she's still awake and I can talk to her now. So
Britt, we are so thankful for your service. We are thankful for all you do in our community. We're glad that you're here tonight, and we do hope that your friend, your family member is healthy and does fine. So please,
yes, it'll be great.
If everybody would give her a round of applause, please. Thank you very much to Britt Kennerly.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back. And I think
I did want to say that I wore this.
I love it.
I was worried that I would be recognized out on the street. So they'll know, oh, wait a minute, I'm advertising it. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, ma'am, and thank you. And your action item would be to have people write letters to the editor.
Write letters to the editor and come up with those, come up with that. He said, she said, he said, back and forth between yourself and maybe, of someone with whom you vehemently disagree. We love those types of columns, and check out, as I said, check out the opinion page tomorrow for that very sort of thing on homelessness.
Thank you again, Britt, and thank you. We'll have a safe night. Again, our best wishes to you and to your family member.
Thank you.
For speedy recovery. Let us press on. Thank you. I see that we have a hand up from Bonnie Ida. Bonnie, your question.
Yes, I was so happy to hear Pat talk about the education system. I'm a former teacher, a retired teacher. And what I wonder, a little different aspect of what she talked about is, what were we doing wrong that we've raised a generation of people who don't think, who just follow what someone with some kind of charisma has to say to them. I was really concerned about the variation of textbooks. Do you have any idea what can be done? What some suggestions to change things?
I would like to make some suggestions. I don't know how much it will change things in our society that values testing more than teaching. And I blame that for some of our problems. Critical thinking is not testing. What can we do? I ask all citizens to stay alert. And when you hear about things like books being banned, or several years ago, it was a big issue here that they were taking the Muslim chapter out of the world history book, things like this. When it happens, speak out against it. Take the time. A lot of people just ignore it or shake their heads and say, even the good people, I don't have time to deal with this, but apathy makes it worse, and indifference. So if people actually will act, stay alert and speak out, or this is my action item. Support groups that stand up for your First Amendment, like the ACLU. There is a group called the National Coalition Against Censorship, or the group that I had, the Democratic Women's Club. We're always up in Tallahassee fighting all of the bills that take away your rights. in a free society, it's an individual's right to decide, what they watch, how they speak, how they act. And to use the freedom responsibly is wonderful. And I really believe this is important, though, that all of us should be active teachers to other members of our family about the First Amendment. In my classroom, the First Amendment was one of the things I emphasized. It was a major subject. And in teaching the First Amendment, it gives you an opportunity to teach about all the different things that matter with your freedoms, and to teach the civility that Barb was talking about, and to get this across to people, that people have the rights to do these things. And, you don't have the right to hurt someone, but you have the right to have your own view of things. So if we could just get these ideas out there and make people not afraid to stand up when someone's taking some rights away, that would be my action item. Or to join one of the organizations that specifically works on saving your First Amendment rights.
Barb, do you
If
know?
you can't join, you support them. Donate.
Right. I should say, Patty, do you know in high schools today, are there classes on logic and reason, rational thought, that sort of thing, or is that just
Ideally, Phil, ideally, that's taught in all of the classes. Okay, if you're a good teacher, you should be teaching that in every class that's done at a high school level. Rational thought. One of my good friends taught home ec. There was nothing more rational than giving a kid a hot, a stove that turned on gas or something. You have to have rational thought when you're doing some of these things, just cooking. But it should be taught in all classes and not emphasized. Unfortunately, I just think too much time is spent emphasizing trying to get the right answer on a test.
Well,
How many students are taught that, that if you don't know, what you really should pick is B because it's the one that's chosen the most, or this kind of stuff, more so than critical thinking.
Right, test taking skills 101. How exciting that is.
Taking.
And Professor Tilly, back to you.
Yes. So I just wanted, I know we're getting a little bit perhaps off topic of free speech, but in my time teaching at university, I've written, I think 30 books now. And one of the books is a book on systems analysis, and it has a big section on critical thinking. And I can tell you that it's one of the least popular chapters in the book. There is no sort of critical thinking course that, in my experience at 3 different universities now, it's something that educators understand that's important, but it's simply not really fit into the curriculum properly. It's not focused on very much. It's given a glance, in one of the undergraduate classes. It's no part of any graduate course. It's just not. It should be. That's why I write about it, but it's not anymore.
One of the most important skills.
Let me interrupt. I'm not muted, but I'm going to interrupt. Professor Tilly, I would argue with you that critical thinking was part of the First Amendment, because you have to have critical thinking to protect it. Okay, and that we just need people thinking and acting appropriate for a democratic society.
Well, I mean, I agree.
Appropriate now.
Just in sort of operationalizing it in the university curriculum, it just doesn't happen very much right now.
It doesn't happen in the high school curriculum either.
Yeah.
in an ideal society, maybe it would.
I see that DP's got his hand up, but I'm going to throw in a recommendation for a book that I dearly love. Carl Sagan wrote a book called The Demon Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Darkness. And one of its chapters is your baloney detection kit. It's essentially a short course in logic. And literally in one chapter, he goes through some basic logic and rational thought exercises. And it is one of the most... it's easy for people to read. It's well written. He builds this entire book around the idea that reasonable people can think rational thoughts about hard things. And right now, that book, honestly, I wish everybody had that book in their hands, because in a few chapters, he really helps people equip themselves with the ability to think rationally. And it's a good thing. Anyway, DP, back to you, sir. You had a question.
I've actually got two questions, very similar in nature, from Facebook. Nadia Estrada and Scott Rook ask, basically, what can we do as far as this obstruction to our freedom of speech being taken away not only by not only government, but our communities? And how do we encourage critical thinkers who will challenge what is spoon-fed to them, whether real or fake news? This is a general question for everybody.
Which of our panelists would like to pick that one up?
Oh.
Well, I can take a stab. So the first one, I come back to the fact that you have to be an intelligent consumer of news, so that you're not you don't believe everything you're being spoon-fed. You know, if you just sit at home and you watch either CNBC or Fox News, you know, one side or the other, your worldview is going to be totally shaped by everything you're being spoon-fed, and neither are the way to live, for sure. The second thing is, you know, we live in a capitalist society, and my best advice for people, if you want to make a difference, is walk away from these social media platforms. Just stop using them. They make money. Remember, as a user of Facebook, you're not a user, you're data. You're data to them. And so if you want to impact how they operate, stop using it. Just walk away. Stop using these things. And eventually, other platforms will come up that might be better suited for civil discourse and so on. But that's the best way of doing it. Hit them in the pocketbook. Just stop using them. Yep.
Something came out recently that Facebook users are 70% conservative. Don't quote me exactly, but I heard something about that today, and I think it was on Pod Save America. So I think change has not happened in America from the top down. So unless the left mobilizes and joins other left movements, in my viewpoint, I think there's much more power in numbers. I think the government gets very concerned when they see people in the street and when they see people of all different colors and class, because that lets them know that they're not pitting us against each other.
Yeah.
So I think for the leaders of the movements, it's super important that we learn how to practice inclusion.
There's another point I wanted to make about all these social media platforms, and that is, we are not the center of the world. You know, Facebook has 2.5 billion users. So the majority of people who use Facebook are not in America. They're all over the world. So it really needs to be a very large movement to stop using these platforms, because we think we're kind of like the center of the world, but we're actually not. We're a small portion of these international platforms. Twitter is smaller by orders of magnitude, but something like Facebook, it's just all over. And so we really need to spread the word, if you want, to have more informed consumers about everywhere, not just here. Even if everyone in America turned off Facebook, they would be totally fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Scott, I wanted to ask you about how I found it interesting that the Lincoln Project around the presidential election we're teaching people how to spot bots and how to send the bot message over to them so that they could eliminate them. Do you have a program like that or anything that teaches people how to?
No, I don't. And the thing about bots that you're talking about, which are doing basically automated postings to Twitter and Facebook, the reason why they become so prolific is that you don't need to understand how they work anymore. You basically just buy them and deploy them. They're like cybersecurity exploits. That's why, kids in their parents' basement are able to do all these hacks, because they don't understand how they work, but they don't have to. You just buy them and deploy them. So being able to do the reverse action and detect bots and turn them off is always harder than doing the attack. It's just always like, that's the way it's going to be, and more so. Yeah.
Addie, did you want to add anything to this question?
No, not really, but my mind is spinning like crazy over what Professor Tilley said. Is it fair to regulate this in their whole dialogue here with the concept of freedom, net neutrality, and having the right to do these things, but the whole idea of the bots working and doing these things? How do you feel about the legality, the morality of bots, and who should do something?
Well, I think it's actually impossible to regulate these because these are worldwide things. So for example, when one of the social media platforms during the election got taken offline, Parler, which tends to be a more conservative
Familiar with that.
Yep. And so Amazon said, we're not going to host you anymore on their platform, on their webs. So people in Russia said, we'll host you, no problem. And then everyone can still access them. So the ability to moderate and control these platforms now is just gone. It's the Pandora's box is open and gone. It's not going to happen. It'll always have a place to go. And in fact, I believe it's against our national security to moderate them, because they'll end up going to places like Russia, China, wherever, where we have absolutely no control over them anymore, but they'll still be running. We have no influence on those things anymore. So I think it's just, that part is just too late. The moral issue, that's a little bit different. Yeah.
Here's an interesting question for you, Professor, and that is that you had mentioned earlier that you felt very bad about the fact that the previous president had been taken off of Facebook. And one of the things that they bring up, and I think it's a valid point, and that is that he was removed because he violated the terms of the agreement. When you become a member, log on to any of these things, right, Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you agree to terms of engagement. I forget the right phrase, but basically, you're not allowed to incite violence. You're not allowed to do that sort of thing. And literally he did that, and it was very blatant, I think, that he did, and therefore they had a right to take him off. What's your perception of that? I mean, if somebody encourages somebody
so why
to,
is the head of North Korea still online?
Great point. It's a great point. So the point is,
so there's so many people
should be pulled,
who have violated those terms of agreements, but Facebook has been very selective on who to remove. And that's the part I don't like. Because again, I don't care what your political perspective is on past President Trump. It could be for something that's going to, for President Biden coming up. Who knows? But they're selectively applying their terms of agreement, which almost no one ever reads, of course. And that part is not right. That's where the application of suppression of speech is just not right. And they've got so many people around the world who are just despots, and they're still on Facebook.
They're cranking it out. Yes, it's selective enforcement of laws, and that, of course, is valid in all areas of society. When you have selective enforcement of speed limit laws, say, whatever. Anyway, I see our hands
We have
up.
more
Bonnie,
rules in the real world, and we have less rules for enforcement in the online world.
Indeed. Yeah. Bonnie Ida, you're up.
Hey, to me, there's something missing in this discussion, and it's the arts. And I don't blame anybody since none of you are, that's not your field. But I just think it's so incredibly important. As an arts teacher, I made a point of teaching the kids that art is about seeing, and you cannot see if you have prejudice. So everything I could build around that to a lot of what we're talking about today. And we happen to live in a town that is just allowing an art museum to be destroyed because it is a threat. The reality, the truth that comes out of the arts is a threat to this business-oriented, Barbara, your phrases, society, competition, business, everything first. Nobody wanted to support that museum or even make an effort, including our university, FIT. They're the ones that sold it down the river. So, excuse me for making.
No, to be specific, you're talking about the Fusner Arts Center, yes?
Yeah. So I think the role of the arts is incredibly important, and maybe all of us should try and find a way to bring the arts into our conversations and our discussions and our platforms and our media, that can help this cause.
I'll tell you what, that in itself is again another semester or year of college discussing the impact of the arts on a freedom of expression, and what's going to go to the Supreme Court next. We have enough time for about one more question, and I think it's about time. Do we have another closing question? Daniel McDowell, have you seen anybody else raising their hand?
No, but if I could sneak in a question here real quick to
sure, you're it.
Professor Tilley. And I want to be able to say thank you to all of our panelists. What a great evening. The percentage I'm fascinated by that percentage that you were quoting, but it's also about volumes. Is America just a lot noise? Are we just a lot of the activity on that Facebook platform? And maybe that's what's going on. It's an 80-20 kind of rule.
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. It's certainly, we're in the news a lot because we're the major news source. So we're talking about ourselves, kind of like constantly. I don't know what percentage of traffic, if you're sort of asking that on Facebook, where it comes from. That part I don't know. And there are other competing platforms, of course. China has their own because they banned Facebook there. Some parts of the Middle East have their own. But I don't know what is the percentage of the American activity on Facebook relative to the number of users. I'm sorry, I don't know that. Yeah.
Boy, is that a great question. And I guess we're going to leave it at that. I would like to remind everybody that's still with us tonight that next month our next First Thursday event, the first Thursday of June, will be our program called Conspiracy of Lies, Voter Suppression in the U.S. That is on the 3rd of June. And I'll tell you what, again, it's kind of along the same line as this discussion. There's so many of these topics interrelate. As somebody mentioned, the Venn diagram of this sort of stuff, they are overlapping issues, and they are challenges that our society faces, and we will be successful if we face them together, if we face them with honesty, if we face them with a genuine desire to find solutions, not just to fight. If anything, tonight, I'm going to, first of all, let me ask each of our speakers, Professor Tilley, could you give us an action item, something for everybody that they can take with them, something that they can do?
The main thing I would suggest is if you find that you're being unduly influenced, I would say, by single source news, then find other sources as well.
Change the station.
Yeah. We'll add more stations, probably.
Add more stations, absolutely. Patty Farley, what would you like to leave us with again?
If you hear about someone's rights being violated or books being banned or whatever, don't just shake your head and walk away. Speak out about it, or support, report it, or support a group such as the ACLU, the Alliance Against Censorship, or the Democratic Women's Club, or some group that stands up and is actively supporting your rights. And become a member if you want, or at least support.
Absolutely. Membership and support of each other. And I would like to encourage people to join the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. You can go to our website, www.scpaflorida.com, to join our organization. It's inexpensive, just as it is inexpensive to join any of the organizations that Patty mentioned. And we do gain strength from membership, and you learn by being a member of these organizations. You learn so much. Barb Segura, what would you like to leave folks with, again, as an action item for tonight?
Well, I'd like you to think about social energy and remember how you felt on January 20th. You might have felt a whole bunch of relief, or you might have noticed that many people around you cried and were very relieved, and that social energy can be changed by individuals, by what we did here tonight together, by the action items that each of the presenters have shared. And I would like to add that by being the love and the caring and the generosity that we want to see in the world, we do change our environment and the social energy of this county. If you feel cynical or despairing, particularly because I did talk about lofty things, although people go to therapy, people go to marriage counseling, you go because you know that you can get something and something can open inside you. If you feel cynicism and despair, think about that it could come from the worldview of scarcity and self-reliance. We're not trained to be interdependent and to be in a community with others. We're trained to, be strong on our own. So I'd like to leave you with that thought.
And with those words, Barb Segura gets the last word tonight. I know that Daniel McDowell wants everybody to please take yourselves off of mute. So go down to the corner, take yourself off mute, and let's give our three wonderful speakers tonight a round of applause. We can all do this live now. And so for Professor Scott Kelly, Britt Kennerly, who had to leave early, Patty Farley, Barb Segura, thank you. Thank you again. A wonderful night, a wonderful discussion. It is our honor to have each of you. I mean, it is genuinely our honor. We are very fortunate to have not only all of you, our speakers that are remaining, but our guests. And, our president actually asked us before logging off tonight to say, how are we doing? Very quickly. I mean, let's do this. If we could do it rapid fire. If anybody has any quick thoughts, did we do okay tonight? How did you see us? Was this what you would hope to see when you logged on? Anybody?
And the folks that are on mute can take themselves off of mute anytime.
So you can add a comment if you want real fast so that we get a little feedback from you.
Excellent.
Thank you, DP.
Keep these Zooms coming until we can meet in person.
Thank you, Claudia. Anybody else?
I came. I am new here. I live in West Palm Beach. My friend is Barb. I wanted to hear her, but the speakers were outstanding. I'm an educator. I know what it all means, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for an amazing evening.
Thank you for joining us, Ruthie. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Ruth. I appreciate it.
And Rod, I hear you on board. Did you want to ask anything or say anything to anybody?
It's great. The whole discussion. I mean, I just left because we had to break fast, and I was fasting today, and just apologized. But the whole conversation from the beginning, everyone brought a different aspect of this issue that we're dealing with, and I'm still trying to find a way where we find a way to agree to disagree. And I think that's the challenge that we'll continue to do. And I know the freedom of speech is a big topic, but I really appreciate what everyone brought in today, and that this could not be done in a wide array like we did today. So I really thank everyone who attended and participated today.
Salam, my friend, salam. And I think that's going to bring our evening to an end. I would like to remind our Action Projects Committee members to please stay on board with us while we say goodbye to everybody else. Have a pleasant evening. Please be safe as you go out. For those of you that are mothers, I want to say a very, very happy Mother's Day. For those of you that have mothers, and I hope that's all of you, I hope you have a safe journey, safe evening, and please do be safe. So if the ABC will hang around with us, have a great night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Night. Thank you.